I spent 30 years working in the event industry in Los Angeles, and during that time I had uncountable encounters, for the most part forgettable, with the famous of the entertainment industry and other industries, politics, science, and the arts. But there are several encounters, both positive and negative, that for one reason or another made such a strong impression upon me as to cause them to be unforgettable. Here is a selection of some of those encounters in no particular order. Bob and Jenny Newhart. Bob Newhart is an award-winning comedian and actor best known for his deadpan delivery. He came to prominence in the 1960s with his best-selling comedy album, The Button-Down Mind of Bob Newhart, and from there went on to build an immensely successful career in television and films. His wife, Jenny Newhart, December 9th, 1940 to April 23rd, 2023, was a director and performer, as well as the daughter of character actor William Quinn. I worked at the Bel Air, California home of the Newharts every Thanksgiving and Christmas over a period of perhaps 8 years. What is unforgettable for me is that during my times at their home, it was not only trusted without question that I knew what I was doing, but I was never once met with a harsh word or expression. The Newharts always remembered my name, were always warm, and without fail provided a generous gratuity. One might ask why this experience is for me so memorable. Well, some might be surprised to know that this is not always the case when working in the homes of celebrities, or anyone for that matter. In fact, one must almost always carefully navigate huge egos that must justify a sense of superiority, combat feelings of insecurity, or when dealing with a host's representative, justify their position by being unnecessarily demanding and controlling. Tony Curtis. Tony Curtis is a star of old Hollywood, first gaining prominence for his especially good looks, and later being appreciated for his acting and artwork. He is the father of recent Supporting Academy Award winner Jamie Lee Curtis, whose mother was Janet Leigh, perhaps best known as the female lead in Alfred Hitchcock's 1960 film Psycho. I had 2 encounters with Tony Curtis that have stuck with me, the earliest being at an event attended by many of the old Hollywood guard. I specifically remember his ex-wife Janet Leigh being present, as well as Angie Dickinson, most well known to me from her late 1970s television show Policewoman. I was working as a bartender when Tony Curtis approached the bar for a drink, and while making the drink, Mr. Curtis, in a surprisingly obvious manner, seemingly began to flirt with me. I smiled, finished his drink, and gave it to him, along with a, "Here you are, sir." I assume he took that as an answer to his inquiry, which it was, because a disappointed look appeared on his face and he walked away. Now, as it happened, just a few weeks later, I was working at a retail store in Beverly Hills, one of the myriad of events I had worked over the years in upscale stores that held invitation-only gatherings to celebrate a new opening or a new line of products or any of a variety of excuses in an attempt to increase sales. Again I was a bartender, and again Tony Curtis was a guest. He approached my single-man bar, and as he approached, he halted as he saw me. Then he walked up and rudely grabbed a glass, which is of course within my domain, and plopped the glass down in front of me, demanding water. I looked at him for a moment, and after deciding that losing my job was not worth the satisfaction of cussing out Tony Curtis, I asked if he wanted still or sparkling water, to which, after adopting a quite confused expression, he angrily answered, "Running water." I poured him still water. After he departed, I had a very good laugh, which has been repeated on several occasions when I have described this encounter to others. Sticking with the Curtis clan, I had a memorable encounter with Jamie Lee Curtis some years ago. This was at an event held at the home of Rob Reiner, son of the multi-talented writer and performer Carl Reiner. and best known as director of several hit films during the 80s and 90s, as well as starring as Meathead in the 70s comedy TV show All in the Family. Jamie Lee Curtis was a guest at this event. I was standing in the foyer of the home, holding a tray of some beverage or other to offer as guests arrived. Jamie Lee descended the staircase from the second floor, dressed very nicely and overall looking quite becoming. I had up to that point been a fan, and upon seeing her I smiled warmly, to which for some odd reason she took offense and stomped the rest of the way down the stairs and into the depths of the house. I was dumbfounded by this, but threw it out of my mind and returned to what I was doing. A few moments later, Carl Reiner's wife, Michelle Singer, came marching up to me and in a state of seething rage demanded that I tell the guests as they entered that there were bars available for them to get other beverages than the one that I happened to be serving. And this was in front of my company manager, Scott, who simply stood silent with his head down. I was too stunned to even give this woman a response, and simply turned away from her just to escape the savagery of her eyes. I knew that Jamie Lee had had a hand in arranging this humiliating encounter, but I just couldn't understand why. What had I done to cause this? It wasn't until some time later I saw a clip from the 1983 Academy Awards, and an instance when Jamie Lee Curtis and Carl Weathers were presenters. Weathers made a comment about Jamie Lee looking juicy, which from my point of view was inappropriate. Digging deeper, I discovered that Jamie Lee, as with many young actors, had had a history of having to deal with sexual harassment in Hollywood, as well as being dependent on illicit as well as prescription drugs. So that has led me to wonder if her reaction to my innocent smile was connected somehow to those issues. I suppose I will never know for sure, but it remains an encounter that I will never forget. Faye Dunaway. Faye Dunaway is an Academy Award-winning actress, praised for her beauty and unusual style of acting. She was prominent throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s in films such as Bonnie and Clyde, The Thomas Crown Affair, Chinatown, Network, The Eyes of Laura Mars, and Mommy Dearest. There are two encounters with Faye Dunaway that have stayed with me, one rather humorous and the other a bit sad. The first occurred several years ago at the home of an elderly gay couple, as I remember they were producers of some kind, living in one of the ultra-wealthy communities on the west side of Los Angeles. I distinctly recollect how beautiful this home was, both inside and out, with a large reception room being decorated in an African motif, containing the most stunning original African furniture that I had ever seen. I had already worked several events at this home, and this day the owners were hosting a brunch for a female member of European nobility. Faye Dunaway arrived with her teenage son, and mingled with the rest of the guests inside the reception room before all were invited outside to the terrace for brunch. It was quite a sunny day, and as it turned out, there weren't enough umbrellas to completely cover every seat at every table. As it happened, Faye Dunaway and her son were two of the last guests to head out to the terrace. As she exited the house, she halted, and then began to discreetly peruse the tables for 2 seats in the shade. There were none. She finally motioned to her son to 2 chairs that were unshaded. As they sat, Faye Dunaway gave a smiling greeting to the rest of the table, and then proceeded to remain uncomfortably still for several moments. Without moving her head, her eyes drifted up to gaze at her enemy, the sun. Something suddenly occurred to her. She then dug into her purse to retrieve a large scarf, which she wrapped around her entire head, leaving only a narrow oval of her face exposed. That being done, her eyes gave the sun one more glance, this time triumphant. She then cracked a smile of relief and proclaimed to all at the table, "Isn't this wonderful?" In a side note that illustrates the lifestyle of the vast majority of those guests, There was a woman photographer who had been hired to take candid and posed photographs during the event. I overheard her asking the guest of honor, the princess or whatever her title of nobility was, whether she appeared to be working extra hard. To which the noble woman replied, "No, why do you ask?" The photographer said that one of the guests had commented to her, "You're working very hard," to which another guest concurred. The princess then replied, "Darling, remember, these people don't work. If you're moving faster than a casual pace, you will appear to be working hard to them." The second encounter with Faye Dunaway was at an outdoor reception after a movie premiere. As I recall, it was for the 2000 film The Patriot with Mel Gibson and Heath Ledger. I was stationed at the entrance of the VIP section, tasked with only allowing in those who had been deemed VIPs for the event. Faye Dunaway walked up and asked to enter the area, to which I answered, "I'm sorry, but this area has been reserved for those on the VIP list." A sad, almost desperate expression formed on her face. After a moment she said, "I'm Faye Dunaway." I replied, "I know exactly who you are, Miss Dunaway, but unfortunately this area has been reserved for a specific list of guests." She accepted this with a nod and, with an air of dejection, walked away. As she disappeared into the crowd, I could only think that it hadn't been that long since she would have been considered a VIP at any event she attended. Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra was one of the most celebrated singers of the 20th century. After joining the Tommy Dorsey Band in 1939, he was finally on a path to stardom that led to prominence as a heartthrob to teenage girls across the globe. From there, his work evolved to include appearing in Hollywood films as well as releasing many best-selling albums, doing concert tours, television specials, and Las Vegas residences throughout his 6-decade career. Rightfully considered a one-of-a-kind song interpreter with a one-of-a-kind voice. I had many encounters with Frank Sinatra. Unfortunately, all of them unpleasant. He was notoriously rude and loudly angry when dealing with waitstaff. However, there is one memory that made a distinct impression upon me which occurred the last time I saw him. The event was at the home of Don Rickles and his wife, Barbara. I can't remember what specifically was being celebrated, but Bob Newhart and his wife Virginia, as well as Carol O'Connor from the television series All in the Family, were guests, among several others. Frank Sinatra was there with his wife Barbara, and it was the only time I saw Frank Sinatra at an event where he wasn't focused on being the center of attention. In fact, he was uncharacteristically quiet and pensive. The moment that sticks with me is seeing Frank Sinatra sitting outside in the area surrounding the pool, quietly looking into the night sky. He sat not moving for some time until a male guest looked at him for a moment and then exclaimed, "That's the moon, Frank." Another memory of Frank Sinatra that has stuck with me occurred after he had passed away. I was working an event at the Westwood, California home of Jenny Mancini, wife of the late Henry Mancini. Again, I have no recollection of what was being celebrated. However, the producer George Slatter was a guest. And I think this was an event at Mrs. Mancini's where the pianist, singer, and standard American music aficionado Michael Feinstein played a short concert. Halfway through the event, George Slatter, for some reason, perhaps it was requested, began telling a string of stories about Frank Sinatra, a seemingly endless number of tales. What struck me about these recitations was that, without exception, each detailed some incident in which Frank Sinatra reacted to a situation with self-centered egotism, rage, or violence. On top of the lack of anything positive being said about Frank Sinatra, for some, at least to me, odd reason, George Slater found every story to be hilarious, as did many of the guests. Not being a fan of Sinatra the man, due to my, for the most part, negative first-hand experiences with him, I was appalled at this display of appreciation for a history of actions that would have completely destroyed the careers of many. I thought, why is this man, even after death, so loved? I have come to the conclusion that this extensive affection for Frank Sinatra is rooted partly in the kind of hero worship enjoyed by so many characters throughout history who lived their lives either unlawfully or focused on the darker side of existence, such as Machiavelli, Jesse James, John Dillinger, or Al Capone. There is a human tendency to admire those who are able to do whatever they please and yet for some reason are allowed to get away with it. If not for a lifetime, for at least a very long time. But the prominent explanation for the embracing of Frank Sinatra's character lies in him, despite all the negative, being a caring, loyal, and most of all, generous man. There are multitudes of stories, none of which were mentioned by George Slater that evening, of Frank Sinatra showing undying support for those he loved, and to many that he was only acquainted with. Generous financial and professional support, often anonymous, that sparked long careers for some and saved many others from complete despair and disaster. The good balanced, or for many, outbalanced the bad. To quote comedian Norm Crosby, if he was spoiled, it was because people made him that way. Nobody ever said no to Frank. But no one will ever know the bills he paid for friends, for entertainers, and people he knew casually. If someone was in the hospital, he would pay the bill. He would pay the tab. Nobody would ever know. It was done from the heart. In today's world, I can't help but wonder if it all would have been enough to keep him from being canceled. Don and Barbara Rickles. Don Rickles was primarily a stand-up comedian who gained prominence in the 1950s and 1960s with what has been coined insult comedy. It was Frank Sinatra who, after seeing Don Rickles perform and being the butt of his insults, went out of his way to see that Don Rickles came to the attention of those who could aid in his success. Don Rickles went on to become a major star, appearing in films, television, and headlining in Las Vegas. His wife Barbara was a producer. The Rickles were best friends with the Newharts. In fact, I can't remember ever working an event at either home where the other couple was not present. Working at the Rickles was very similar in experience to working at the Newharts, friendly, trusting, and generous. The only instances of any negativity towards myself or the staff was when Frank Sinatra happened to be a guest. Don Rickles, however, rightfully adored Frank Sinatra. His music would be playing throughout the event, and he would be greeted by Rickles with a kiss on his hand. Barbra Streisand. Barbra Streisand is a renowned singer, actor, director, and producer. She rose to prominence in the early 1960s and remained a powerful force in the entertainment industry throughout the 1990s, and remains a respected global icon to this day. I have had a handful of encounters with her, with all except the first being what I would describe as benign in nature. I have never actually worked at her Malibu residence. However, deserved or not, she has a reputation within the upscale event industry of being rude, elitist, and difficult to deal with. As a youth, I was a huge Barbra Streisand fan. The first time I laid eyes on her was when I was taken by my stepmother to see a movie called On a Clear Day You Can See Forever. I remember thinking that she must have come from another planet. Her face, her voice, her singing, all struck me as being unlike anyone else I had ever seen or heard. From that point, I was obsessed with this woman's talent and beauty. I introduced myself to everything she had done before I became aware of her, and kept up with everything she did after. I would say that I remained a devotee until around 1990, when I became distinctly aware that the inhibitions and chance-taking of her performances had for some reason greatly diminished, and had been replaced by what felt to me to be a calculated and technical approach to performance. For me, it had been the freedom within her work that made it magical. Nonetheless, when the day arrived that I did encounter Barbra Streisand for the first time, I was very excited to have the chance of personally waiting on her. Throughout most of the event, which was held at Paramount Studios in honor of Nelson Mandela, I was simply just another waiter looming, with no necessity to actually speak to Barbra Streisand. However, once dessert was served, I had the responsibility of offering coffee and tea to her table. As I worked myself around the table, I was becoming a little giddy inside at the prospect of just asking her if she would like coffee or tea. When I finally arrived to her, I could feel a smile forming on my face, and I said, "Hello, would you care for coffee or tea?" My question was met with silence. Not even a hint of acknowledgement. I thought that maybe it was possible that she did not hear me, even though I could see that her focus wasn't elsewhere, she wasn't engaged in conversation. "Would you care for coffee or tea?" I said. This time, she turned her head to look directly at me, and in a loud voice, not quite a scream, said, "No!" I moved on to the next guest, who made a point of giving me an extra cheerful response to my question, which I appreciated. As I walked away from the table, feeling a bit stunned, all that came to my mind was how much at that moment I regretted all the years and money I had spent as a fan of this woman. As it happens, I have not spent another dime or gone out of my way to join the audience in person or on television of any performance of hers since. Can I say that this really is due to that negative encounter with her? Probably not. As I said already, my devotion to Barbra Streisand as a performer had already waned drastically. And I still do, on occasion, enjoy watching her early concerts and films, which to this day continue to exude a powerful magic that is inescapably magnetic. Julie Andrews. Julie Andrews is an Academy Award-winning actor and singer who has starred on stage, television, and film in a variety of roles that have gained both critical and popular acclaim. She originated the roles of Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady and Mary Poppins in Mary Poppins. Roddy McDowall. Roddy McDowall was a well-known actor who began his career as a child star and was able to make a successful transition to adult performer. He is perhaps best known for playing Cornelius in the original 1968 film Planet of the Apes, as well as several sequels and television versions. Also, he was a very close friend to Elizabeth Taylor and in a romantic relationship with the actor Montgomery Clift in the early 1950s. Jahan Sadat. Jahan Sadat was an Egyptian human rights activist and the First Lady of Egypt from 1970 until her husband, Anwar Sadat, President of Egypt, was assassinated in 1981. As Egypt's First Lady, she greatly influenced the reform of the country's civil rights legislation. She advanced laws referred to as the Jahan Laws that gave women in Egypt a range of new rights, such as the right to child support and custody of their children in the event of divorce. What memorable thing do Julie Andrews, Roddy McDowall, and Jahan Sadat have in common? During the uncountable numbers of events I've worked throughout the years, they are the only three guests, not hosts, who ever took the time to come to the kitchen to let us, the staff, know how wonderful everything was and how much they appreciated what we did. Dustin Hoffman. Dustin Hoffman is an award-winning actor who gained prominence after starring in the critically acclaimed and popular 1967 film The Graduate, and went on to appear in a string of successful, highly acclaimed films such as Midnight Cowboy, Lenny, All the President's Men, Marathon Man, Kramer vs. Kramer, Tootsie, Rain Man, and I Heart Huckabees. I have had two encounters with Dustin Hoffman. Both have stuck with me for different reasons. One was quite upsetting to me, and the other was simply odd. The first occurred when I was assigned to work a small dinner party at his home. As I made my way around the sections of the house in which the staff would be working, I was struck frozen at the sight of a large glass-protected display that contained a vast collection of the most offensive 19th to mid-20th century dolls, along with a large variety of other items that depicted African Americans in grotesque caricatures with large white or bright red lips and unnaturally black skin. All adopted the kinds of facial expressions and bodily postures that were meant to portray the perpetually happy Negro that made so much of the white community comfortable. Completely devoid of any anger or even recognition of their place in society, or of the horrors of everyday life experienced by the vast majority of blacks living in the United States. What made me so surprised was that from my understanding at the time of the character of Dustin Hoffman, I would have never thought it possible for him to feel that glorifying this type of ignorance would be appropriate. The other fact that made it, naively on my part, hard to comprehend was that it is plainly obvious that Dustin Hoffman is a Jew, a member of a race that has arguably suffered some of the most horrendous oppression and abuse throughout the longest period of the history of mankind. I would have assumed at the time, in my younger years, that he would have to be sensitive to such issues, at least more than the majority of Gentiles in the United States. But I have since become well aware of the fact that this is often far from the case among groups that have endured extreme degradation because of their race or ethnicity. At the time, I devised a plan. Having the Hoffman's address, I was going to collect as many disgusting examples of hate-filled Jewish propaganda from throughout history that I could find, focusing, of course, on the most stinging period of Nazi Germany. I would then box everything up, wrap the box in the most festive of Hanukkah paper, and mail it to their house with a note stating, "I thought you might love to have these to add to your extensive collection." I am grateful in the end. After some time had passed, my rage dissipated and the thought of that type of revenge lost its appeal. I became even more grateful when recently I saw Dustin Hoffman on the Dr. Louis Gates created show Finding Your Roots, during which Hoffman seemed to come to terms with what it really means to be a Jew in the history of the world, and how that history connects directly to him. Not just what it means in America, where it is relatively easy to avoid and forget the oppression and denigration their ancestors suffered and survived for them to be here, alive, and for the most part safe, where many feel that the fact they are Jewish plays no part in their lives. Dustin Hoffman states with great emotion that today, when someone asks him what he is, he says, "I'm a Jew." The second memorable encounter with Dustin Hoffman had its beginnings several years after working that dinner party at his home, during another one of the multitudes of events that I have worked at some random wealthy family's home. I don't remember anything about the event or its hosts. However, I distinctly remember having quite a long conversation with the family's long-term housekeeper, who, after learning of my ambition as a creative, told me about her history in pursuit of an acting career, as well as her time studying at the Pasadena Playhouse. She apparently attended the Playhouse along with Dustin Hoffman, and had quite a few stories about their time as fellow students and performers. Before leaving, I asked her name and told her how much I enjoyed speaking with her. As it so happened, not more than a month later, I was working some event at one of the major studios in the Los Angeles area. And not only was Dustin Hoffman a guest, but somehow he was close enough to me to start a casual conversation. I took the opportunity to bring up this woman that I had met, who had gone to the Pasadena Playhouse with him. At first he seemed quite interested, but when I said her name and asked if he remembered her, his tone changed drastically, with the cold exclamation, "No." He then put his head down and walked away. Odd. Debbie Allen. Debbie Allen has won 5 Emmys, 2 Tonys, a Golden Globe, 10 Image Awards, and is a Kennedy Center Awards honoree. Best known for her role as Lydia Grant in the 1980 film Fame, as well as the subsequent television series. However, Debbie Allen has appeared in numerous films, television series, and television specials as a performer, producer, and director. She has appeared on Broadway in musicals Raisin, West Side Story, and Sweet Charity. She is the founder of the Debbie Allen Dance Academy in Los Angeles, California, which has provided thousands of youngsters who otherwise might not have had the opportunity to study a wide variety of dance disciplines, leading to professional careers in dance for many, and lessons in the rewards of disciplined hard work and a dedication to one's passions that have benefited the characters of all the students. I have encountered Debbie Allen more than a few times, and unfortunately not one of these encounters would I consider pleasant. However, 2 have found a permanent place in my memory, one being absurdly humorous, and the other an unnecessary display of cruelty. The first encounter with Debbie Allen that sticks with me occurred some years ago at the home of entertainment mogul Barry Diller. I had been assigned to the area of the house where the bar was located. Debbie Allen was sitting at the bar with a beverage and a plate on which was a cookie that she had been nibbling. I went behind the bar and proceeded to clear away any empty glasses and plates. As I approached the section of the bar where Debbie Allen was sitting, I reached to clear an empty glass that was sitting to the right of her. All of a sudden, she lashed out at me with the phrase, "Get your hands off my cookie." I looked into her angry face and made a show of the fact that I had been reaching for the glass. Her expression then turned defiant, as if to say, "I don't apologize for anything," as she returned to her cookie and drink. Humorous. Absurdly humorous, but still humorous. The second incident occurred at the Beverly Park home of Denzel Washington. Debbie Allen and her husband, Norm Nixon, were guests at the event. As I remember, it wasn't a large gathering, thus requiring only a staff of perhaps 5 individuals to accomplish all necessary aspects of service. One of the waiters was a young African-American woman who I found out after casual conversation was pursuing a career as a professional dancer. I mentioned that Debbie Allen would be one of the guests that evening, expecting her to be quite excited at the prospect of seeing and possibly even conversing with such a well-known black dancer. To my surprise, she wasn't the least bit impressed at the prospect, saying that she had already met Debbie Allen. I asked where she had met her, and she replied that she had attended some performance or demonstration at which Debbie Allen was a participant, and that she was able to go backstage afterward to meet the dancers. When she encountered Debbie Allen backstage, she said that she was very excited, thrilled in fact, to meet the great Debbie Allen whom she had admired since childhood. She told her hero that she had been a fan of hers since she was a little girl, and that seeing her dance on the Tony Awards was the reason she had decided to be a dancer. To quote this young woman, "She looked at me for a moment and then said, 'If I could have a nickel for every time I've heard that.'" It was obvious that this experience still stung this young woman rather deeply. I, despite not having much appreciation for Debbie Allen's social skills, was none the less shocked that she would say such a cruel thing. Barack Obama. Barack Obama served as the 44th President of the United States from 2009 to 2017. Well known for his down-to-earth demeanor and his ability as an exceptional orator. The one and only time I have encountered Barack Obama was at the home of producer David Geffen. who was hosting a small fundraising event for the then presidential hopeful seeking support for his bid to be the Democratic nominee. The guests consisted of Barack Obama, Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones, as well as, from what I recall, Warren Beatty and Annette Bening. There might have been others that I have no recollection of. I specifically remember Catherine Zeta-Jones singing a song in her native Welsh language, as well as a huge, stunningly beautiful Jackson Pollock painting hanging on the wall of the stairway leading up from the reception area. One thing that has stuck with me about Barack Obama from that event, besides the fact that it was then that I first became aware of this black candidate seeking the Democratic nomination, is that even at that intimate dinner, he was able to display the kind of intelligent and moving oratory skills that, in my opinion, make him unforgettable. But what makes the event even more memorable for me is that after Obama gave his oration and then answered questions from those around the table, David Geffen's expression turned to one of frustration. He then looked at Obama and said, "You've got to be meaner." Sumner Redstone. Sumner Redstone was a billionaire media mogul who served as the executive chairman of CBS and Viacom. I was working an outdoor event at his home in Beverly Park. I have no recollection of what was being celebrated. In fact, the only guest that I can be absolutely sure was in attendance was the accomplished Hollywood actress Rita Moreno. Some of the staff, including myself, were gathered in a room of the house in the process of making preparations of some kind. The girlfriend of Sumner Redstone entered the room and began making a statement about wanting the event to be a good time for everyone, and that she wanted the staff to be pleasant and friendly. She then, for some reason, looked directly at me and said, "Okay, sir?" I was taken aback by this because I certainly had not been harboring any angry or unfriendly thoughts. I replied, "Of course, miss," realizing that she must have seen something in my demeanor that made her feel wary about my attitude. Admittedly, I can sometimes unknowingly adopt a rather intense expression even when completely devoid of negative thoughts or feelings. And of course, being black will often add an additional layer of mistrust in the minds of certain individuals. However, once the event actually began, this incident turned horribly ironic. For from the moment Sumner Redstone made his appearance, close to every member of the staff, as well as event managers who crossed his path, were subjected to a consistent barrage of vicious verbal attacks as a result of any detail he found not to be exactly as it should be, leaving any guests in the vicinity to struggle to appear as if they were not witnessing it. The memory of this experience probably would not have stayed with me so doggedly if it weren't for the pre-event speech delivered by Sumner Redstone's girlfriend. It was the combination of the girlfriend's words and Redstone's irrationally egotistical actions that made the whole affair absurdly unforgettable. Later, I learned of an event in Sumner Redstone's life that perfectly illustrated in my mind his capacity for stubborn, egotistical tenacity. In 1979, he was severely burned in a fire at the Copley Plaza Hotel in Boston. The story that I was told was that he saved himself by climbing, already badly burned, out of his hotel room and clung to the ledge of the window. He held on to that ledge with the fire continuing to burn his hands until he was rescued. Whether this version of the story is 100% true or not, I believe without a doubt that it could be. Raquel Welch. Raquel Welch was an actor and sex symbol who achieved acclaim in the 1960s in films such as 1,000,000 Years BC, Fantastic Voyage, The Biggest Bundle of Them All, Bedazzled, and Fathom. She never achieved her ambition to become a respected, versatile actor. However, She remained an icon of classic beauty until her death. I only encountered Raquel Welch once at a house party. The only other celebrity guest I can remember was Sally Field, and only because I distinctly recall a fat white man angrily reprimanding Sally Field because he found her appreciative hoot reaction to the conclusion of a live performer's entertainment to be too black. But regarding Raquel Welch, all the food served at this event was tray-passed. In that case, it was usually planned that plenty of food of a substantial variety are present in the guest area at all times. I happened to offer Raquel Welch hors d'oeuvres on more than one occasion, and each time she would look wide-eyed at the food for a moment and then shake her head no. I was far from the only person to approach her with food, but as it so happened, it was on one of my approaches that her patience apparently snapped, and she yelled, "No!" I simply walked away. But it was obvious, at least in my opinion, that she had reached her limit in her attempts to fight temptation. She had felt her willpower weakening, and that no was the result. FYI, if you are at an event at which food is being tray-passed and you no longer wish to have food offered to you, simply let the host, the event manager, or one of the waiters know, and they will get the message to the staff not to approach you again. The staff will not just make that decision on their own. By the way, Raquel Welch, although no longer young at the time, was still a stunningly beautiful woman. Celebrity handlers. Celebrity handlers are individuals who are appointed by some entities such as the Motion Picture Academy, a studio, an agency, or possibly even an event planner to shadow specific celebrities and ensure that they are treated in a respectful way and provided whatever they might require. Similar to a celebrity's personal assistant, except these people are not directly employed by the celebrity. They are also different from security. I have had two memorable encounters with the same celebrity handler. The first occurred at the Academy Awards post-show Governor's Ball. Exactly what year it was, I can't remember. However, it was at a time when the floor captains were still required to ask the attending guests for their tickets as a way of ensuring that they were sitting at the correct table. This was necessary to avoid guests arriving to their assigned tables and there not being available seats. Since then, the format has been changed from a served dinner at assigned tables to buffets and tray-passed food with open seating. At least this was how it was still being done the last time I was an employee. As the guests arrived at the ball, my staff and myself were greeting those assigned to our section, as well as requesting to see their tickets. Now, quite often, an explanation was necessary as to why we needed to see their tickets. But once explained, we were usually met with total cooperation. Once in a while, the guest, for whatever reason, didn't have their ticket, and my job was to then hand over the issue to an Academy representative whose duty it was to handle those situations. Well, about 10 to 15 minutes in, I was suddenly approached by this woman with short dark hair who was absolutely apoplectic with rage that one of my staff had asked Seal and Heidi Klum for their tickets. She wouldn't listen to any explanation but continued with her tirade until she saw something in my expression that caused her to back away in fear and retreat into the crowd. I wasn't necessarily thinking of murder, but she obviously saw murder. I looked over at Seal and Heidi Klum, who were both clearly making an attempt to appear oblivious. What makes this incident truly unforgettable, however, is that sometime later, I was working an event at either Sony Studios or the Shrine Auditorium, I can't recall which, when I was verbally accosted by this same woman who was now handling the actor Shirley MacLaine. She was screaming for me to get out of the way. In response, I froze exactly where I was and refused to move. It was then that I noticed Shirley MacLaine and realized that this was about making way for the great actor. What made the situation the most ridiculous was that this horrible rage-filled female, along with Shirley MacLaine and myself, were the only three individuals in the vicinity. Looking back, I can't help but wonder why Seal or Heidi Klum would allow their handler to abuse someone simply doing their job, specifically in such a situation in which they really have all the power to intervene. I don't have the same curiosity about Shirley MacLaine. Which leads me to my second memorable encounter with Shirley MacLaine. This occurred at a house party, the details of which I can't remember more than to say that the home was owned by one of the multitudes of wealthy Hollywood entertainment players that inhabit most upscale neighborhoods of the west side of Los Angeles. I was assigned to the very opulent dessert buffet that had been set up in the kitchen. Shirley MacLaine visited the buffet on more than one occasion and each time grabbed a single large cookie. Upon her last visit, she felt it was necessary to announce to me that she was going to have one more cookie, to which I acknowledged her by silently looking at her. She apparently felt that I was somehow judging her decision to consume another cookie because she suddenly became quite defensive and asked if I had an issue with that. I responded with an incredulous shake of my head. She then angrily grabbed another cookie and stomped out of the kitchen. I stood there wondering two things. One, what would lead Shirley MacLaine to entertain the idea that I give a crap about what she eats, or for that matter, anything she does? Two, why would Shirley MacLaine give a crap about my opinion regarding anything about her? Dolly Parton. Dolly Parton is a multi-award-winning singer, songwriter, and actress. She is well known for her generosity, positive attitude, and down-to-earth sincerity. She rose to prominence beginning in the 1960s and has continued to sustain a successful career both in music and film. I encountered Dolly Parton at an outdoor event held at a seaside estate in Malibu. I was working as a bartender and she approached my bar to order a drink. Dolly asked me how I was doing, and that started a short burst of casual conversation, which at one point turned to the food being served on the buffet. She said that all the food was very good and then asked if I had had a chance to taste it. I told her that the staff would be able to eat once the buffets were closed. Dolly Parton then made a statement that I will never forget. "Can I bring you a plate?" she said. If you are not familiar with the culture of Hollywood events or the world of professional events, period, you might not realize how astounding this offer from Dolly Parton was. For a celebrity of her stature, or any guest, to offer to bring one of the staff a plate of food from the buffet is like discovering that Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, and the Tooth Fairy actually do exist. That certainly proved to me that Dolly Parton's generous and considerate nature is not only innate, but also unhindered by her ego. Winnie Mandela. Winnie Mandela was a South African anti-apartheid activist and wife to Nelson Mandela, the first black president of South Africa. She was a member of Parliament, as well as serving on the African National Congress National Executive Committee. This incident took place at an event held at Paramount Studios to honor Nelson Mandela. Yes, this was the same event at which I encountered Barbra Streisand. It consisted of an indoor reception followed by an outdoor seated dinner. I and a few other staff were assigned to aid in setting up the indoor reception. During the process, we were approached by a woman named Missy, who apparently was one of the studio's hosts of the event. I could immediately feel her staring at me with that all-too-familiar glare of racist offense at my presence. She then asked us our names, and as it turned out, there was another waiter with the same first name as myself. Missy took that opportunity to look directly at me and say, "White Bill and Black Bill," with a noticeably emphasis on the word black. Since Missy was obviously Jewish, I was quite tempted to say, White Bill, Black Bill, and Jewish Missy. Now we know what we all are, with an emphasis on the word Jewish, of course. But as is the case with almost all individuals that enjoy abusing waitstaff, they know that it is generally the staff person who will suffer the consequences if they retaliate. Later, once the indoor reception had started, I was informed by the reception captain that Missy had requested a glass of white wine and would I take it to her. I grabbed a tray, picked up the glass of wine, and headed for Missy. As I approached, I saw that Missy and Winnie Mandela were in the midst of a conversation. I made my way over and proceeded to hand Missy the wine, to which Missy responded, as if talking to a dog, "I don't want that." I looked at her for a moment and then turned my attention to Winnie Mandela in unspoken solidarity, which she uncomfortably tried to ignore. A look of horror appeared on Missy's face. I then walked away, gratified. Once the entire event was over, including the outdoor seated dinner, I happened to spot Missy as she made her way back into one of the studio buildings. She suddenly saw me and halted, staring at me with that familiar rage. I stood not moving, meeting her angry stare with defiant satisfaction. She finally broke the stare down and continued into the building. At the time, I thought that without a doubt she was going to do her best to get me fired. But luckily, I never heard a word from my employer regarding the encounter. Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise is a major global phenomenon, an actor, producer who has created and or participated in some of the most successful films and franchises in the history of the movies. Well known for his effervescent smile, his ability to simply run in a way that evokes intense emotion and excitement, and as a performer with the ability and courage to safely perform some of the most breathtaking stunts ever performed. I encountered Tom Cruise while working a rather large event at his Los Angeles estate. I don't remember specifically what the event was celebrating, but I do remember that many well-known performers and celebrities were in attendance, including Oprah. One instance that is clear in my mind is Tom Cruise presenting Brooke Shields with what I could only assume was a peace offering in the form of a beautifully decorated birthday cake. I was in the garage, which was being used as one of the catering kitchens. At one point, Tom Cruise entered the garage, and as I turned and saw him, our eyes met, and he gave me a sincerely warm and welcoming smile. I then asked him if he needed assistance, to which he said he was fine. It was strange, but I actually felt that I was the only thing that mattered to Tom Cruise for those few seconds. And then after the end of a rather long event, all of the staff was in the driveway, loading the last of the equipment and seeing to the various tasks that needed to be accomplished before departing a private home. Suddenly, a loud voice seemed to come out of the night sky. We all looked up to see Tom Cruise standing on a second-floor balcony, and he was yelling, "You guys did an amazing job. You really hit it out of the park. Thank you. Thank you." For me, that is something not to be forgotten, and certainly won't be forgotten.